Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm going to do a walkthrough and review of Woodpeckr by Woodman's Immaculate Maple Syrup Studios. This is available for Mac and iPad. Those are separate purchases, by the way. You'll find links and stuff in the pinned comment of this video. This is a sponsored video, by the way, so massive thanks to Wims for sponsoring me, the dev. As always, sponsorship is paying for my time, not my opinions. And towards the end and through the video, I will give constructive criticism of the app. At the end, I'll kind of summarize what I like and things that I think could be improved. I've given Wim a lot of feedback and he's extremely open to feedback. He loved a lot of my ideas and I think he'll implement a lot of those things, and he said that he will, so that's great. So this video, I wanted to basically help people get started without having to wade through the whole manual like I did. It is a clear manual, mind you. And if you don't have, so if you have the app, help you, get using it quickly, get set up. If you don't have the app, it'll really help you to understand, does the sequence suit your workflow, or is it a workflow that you're willing to experiment with? Because it's definitely got a very idiosyncratic workflow, that is for sure. But it is mad powerful, that's also for sure. So I think some of you will really love this. So when I change preset, by the way, I have to press this start button to get things going. Again, every time you change preset, you'll have to do that. Well, there are different ways, actually, of starting things. We'll look at that later. There's a lot to cover, So I'm going to try and, not get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty. I won't cover every single thing, the manual's there, but I will cover a lot of really important stuff. So let's first understand the basic concept. So here we're looking at the main page, but at the moment we're seeing this sequence here, and we're seeing variation 1 of this sequence. So this is the first thing to understand. If I press here, what we're seeing here is variation 1 of sequence 1. These are the notes for it, right? It's got 12 steps and so on. We've got a bunch of different functions here. I won't look at all that stuff yet, skip, mute, range, notes, and so on. We'll look at that later. So if I then click here, now we're seeing variation 2. And we're hearing it as well. Here, variation 3. Here, variation 4. Now back to 1. Now here, this is sequence 2, and I tap here to go through its variations. This sequence 3, this sequence 4, right? Now, we don't have to have all of the sequences running. I'm just going to set this back to sequence 1, variation 1. So if I press on run here, we can see that in this one, currently we've got all of them running, right? But I can tap here to toggle them on and off. Some really nice presets in this, actually. Mostly made by Wim's son here, Sander. Okay, so then we scroll through the UI with this scroll bar. I have asked if we could use fingers, to scroll. I'd really prefer that, and Wim's looking into that. Also, really important settings here. Also super important to understand. There are settings, different settings for every sequence. Like this is super deep. So here we're seeing sequence 1, right? Sequence 1 is blue color. All the settings for sequence 2, right? So we can see, for example, here, sequence 1 is set to have 12 notes, and they're eighth notes, right? Sequence 2 has 8 notes and they're quarter notes, and there are other settings we can play around with here. We can see here the scale is limited to minor pentatonic. Although that might not work exactly the way you might be used to in some other sequencers, so I'll talk about that. This one here, look, is free. It's not limited to a scale. minor pentatonic. Now this it can be like a fully generative sequencer if you want it to be. I'll show you, well, kind of fully generative. You can't just randomize entire sequences and layers of sequences and stuff. It's not that kind of app. It's definitely something that you're mainly going to want to, learn and work with, and you're going to probably want a bit of music theory as well to make the most of it. But you can randomize notes and things, and you can have those quantized to various scales and stuff. So if you don't really understand much music theory, it is possible, but it's definitely an app that people who understand a bit will get more from. I'm just playing this into stacks here, by the way. I did a 1 hour long walkthrough on this on my Patreon a couple of days ago. Super cool. But let's just hear that on Mersenne by Ice Gear. Video on this in the channel as well. Nice. I think we heard that. I just let give you a little taster of some presets. I like this. This really gives me a brain workout, this sequencer. So that'll massively appeal to some people, not so much to others. That's really nice, isn't it? Just tap the sequence 1 button there. Remember, that's just viewing it. It's nothing about whether it's running. You want to turn things on and off, you have to do that on the run page. I love this one, yeah. Okay, we heard that. So, going through different variations and stuff is one of the really interesting things that you can do. And so here, I'm just changing, like if I change here, for example, to variation 2, now sequencer 4 variation 2 is playing, but on sequence 3, it's variation 1. Now I could change that, for example, variation 3. Here's sequencer 2, we got variation 1. Sequencer 1, variation 1, let's try variation 2. Right, you get the idea. Now, I'm going to switch to something super simple. Okay. So here's just a little thing I made earlier. So I'll start very, very simple. So if we look at run here, you can see I've only got one sequence running. It's this first one, right? Now note this. If I press start here, this sequence will restart, right? You see it went back to bar 0 there. If I turn things on and off here, it'll stop, and when I press on again, it'll start from the same spot, but there is a thing in settings to change that behavior that's worth paying attention to. All right. So what we've got here, let me just look at the settings then quickly, right? So remember, we're dealing with sequence 1 here. So I go to settings, and okay, look, here it's showing me the settings for sequence 2. So tap here, and now I see the settings for sequence 1. 8 notes, dotted 8th value, right? Now, it's funny because it says here, limit scale free, but I did set that to user, and I think there might be some kind of little bug there. because I've also noticed a few funky things about just some behavior related to the user-defined scale here. When I make a scale here by tapping these buttons and stuff, now I'm actually I'll just click here because I don't want to do that. Go back to my sequence. It's when I go back to it, it wouldn't show me what I'd set, but it seems that it's still actually working. It's quantizing it to the scale. Okay. I mean, that might have been user error. I don't know. I might have saved that as free, but I'm pretty sure I had limit scale there. So if I tap here, we can see I set the second one 16 notes and the time is an 8th note. Now we can do a lot to play with timing here. We've got other things in settings, but we won't look at those right now. Right. So if I go in here, this one, I've just set different probabilities for different notes. So by default, these are up at 100 for each note, and just bring it down to reduce the probability of that note playing. Right? You can see here the notes, and there's two ways to view that. I've got abs, that means absolute, toggled on here. If I turn that off, what we see instead is intervals. Here in the first one, we see the first note and we see an actual note value for that. But then here, we're seeing, this just means the second step will be 4 semitones above C4. The third step will be -10, right? So when you're programming your sequences, you might prefer to view intervals. You might want to think about it in that way, or you might prefer thinking about notes, so then press absolute. If I tap here, I get a drop down where I can select notes. I'm personally not all that crazy about that. I don't know, I find it quite fatiguing to program things using that sort of approach. I did mention to Wim, I think it really needs the ability to swipe here to select notes. Personally, I generally prefer a grid entry for notes, but I definitely would prefer, I mean, I'd like to have both. It's great to be able to pick from a list, but it's also great to be able to swipe to select something. So he said he'll add that for sure. That's a definite. Right? Now, next thing here. So here, I've played around with the random note probability for some of those steps. So this step now has a 25% chance of playing a random note. Right? Like that. And those notes will be selected from this ranges that we set here. So you can see here, I set the range to 8 semitones because I didn't want, like by default it's 24, but I didn't want this sequence suddenly having some very high or very low notes coming out of nowhere. So I wanted to limit the range. You know, it's a kind of hypnotic sequence. I want to keep it like that. So, you know, you can adjust the range for every single step. So powerful. But something, you know, you're going to have to think about. This is definitely a thinking man's sequencer, I would say. This range does not affect the notes here. You know, this is the range that I have, and that is not affected by the range button. The range button is just for the random note probability, how widely they can range around. Then here, we just play with velocity. This was tweaked in the latest beta, and it just doesn't go very low at all. I'm not crazy about it. I think I need this to be able to go all the way down, so I can turn these off with the sliders gradually, you know, reduce the volume to 0. I'm pretty sure that'll be tweaked. This was just a hasty little update. It wasn't like that in the original. It went down, I can't remember if it went to 0, but it went down massively more than that. Now, then we have ratcheting possibility. Well, actually, let's look at something else first. Hang on. Where's my number 4 here? Did I forget number 4? Guess so. Okay, so here, step time delta, this is really interesting. So the default, what we had before was like this, right? But what I did here was I've reduced these values. What that's doing is shortening those notes. And it gives it a totally different swing. Now there's a more simpler way to do swing in this as well. It's with the feel control in settings. We'll look at that later. So yeah, when you change the delta, it might change, because you're changing the note lengths, then it might change the length of your sequence. So there's an important button in settings, delta step keep time, and that will make sure that the sequence length doesn't change. Sometimes when I use that, I hear a massive difference, other times no. Don't hear much on this one. Okay. So if I look here, got a variation. Right? That's just a double. Okay, now here we're going into ratchets. So if you look here, ratcheting or step time. So let me press start for a second, just turn this off. So when we dial in a value here, we can basically divide the note into 3 shorter notes repeating that same pitch, 3 or 2 or whatever. There are a lot of different options there. Some of these things also will just change the duration of notes. They're not ratcheting, these things here. So that is really nice. What's also important is here we have this ratchet probability. So by default, this is set to 100. So it means that whatever I set here, that is what will be played, right? So let's just have a listen to this first. I'm using the DAW, but I'm not. It's not set up for that. It's set up to manually start and stop using this button. Let's see what step we're on. I wish when you scrolled, you could always see the steps here. If I scroll down here, I mentioned this in an email to Wim just now. I haven't got a reply. Let's see, probably something that could be tweaked. Maybe that could be duplicated down here or something. I don't know. So let's flick onto this and we'll see here. If I scroll down, here I've set different ratcheting probabilities. So here, for example, it means there's only a 50% chance that it will divide that note into 3 equally timed notes that fill the same space. 50% chance. This has a 60% chance of being divided into 2. If I leave everything up at 100, that will definitely happen, whatever I've set here. If I put everything down at 0, then all these ratcheting things will be ignored and it'll just have whatever, the 1 note value, no division. Now, here we can set up modulation, right? So, for example, CC messages, pitch messages, pressure, aftertouch, polyphonic aftertouch, and so on, right? Now this app also supports MIDI 2.0, right? I'm going to just change this. We'll get this playing that for a while. A bit more mellow. So this also supports MIDI 2.0, but that's disabled, or it's not currently working in hosts. I think most hosts can't really do anything with that anyway. I think AUM can't, so it doesn't matter. But if you're using this to control, I don't know, hardware gear or something, or maybe standalone apps that are set up for that, then you could use that. Now, I've got an example here for sending CC. So if we look here, you can see I've dialed in some values on these 8 steps. So this is going to send out on CC1. So just using it like you would say an LFO, right? Actually, I've set this up for Mersenne here, right? So what I've got here, Combustor, it's just a resonator app. If you're not familiar with it, really cool little app. So Combustor, tap here, I've set it up to be able to receive from, oh no, actually, wait a sec, I hadn't set that there yet. So now it's receiving from Woodpeckr, CC1, and that is going to this feedback knob, right? Channel 1, CC1. So if we look at Woodpeckr again, and let me just change this to custom. Now, by the way, it doesn't resize all that great. There's wasted space there at some sizes. Let's see if that can be improved. I hope so. So if you see here, if I drag all of those down, all of these things here, I drag them all down to 0. Right, so now this feedback knob has a 0 value. If I bring the first one up to 100, oh, that might be really crazy actually. Right, every time it hits that step, it'll kick it up to 100. Now, so if you want something more subtle, you're going to want to put your values closer together. But what would be useful if this had, it's something that that Stax has, for example, is for its modulation sequencer, you can dial in a lag value which will do smoothing, and that can be super useful if you don't want jumpy transitions, right? Now, by the way, I mean, remember that you could, potentially just keep a whole sequencer free, for modulation, and have it running at a much slower time, for example, than your other sequences, if you wanted, right? So, yeah, so we got 4 different modulation sequences that we can set up. Really cool. Really cool. Let's go back to Stax here. So we've looked at all of the main controls here, right? Let's look at a few things here. You can tap to set a BPM, right? You can use this to change your BPM. And if you press this, it'll quickly put it to whatever the host app's BPM is. So here it's 59. So press this and that'll jump to 59, right? Let me just change it again manually. So here, start. This is currently set to manual. So these are things that you find in settings. So let's just take a look at settings. So we've already looked, you can set the number of notes. Now, to always remember, this is for certain sequence. So here we're looking at the second sequence. I think here, let's look at the first one. So number of notes, 8. Dotted eighths, we got a lot of different options there, all your normal dotted and triplets that you could want. Limit scale, here set to user. Notes are absolute. Okay, so this one is basically if you, because if you remember, when you're making a sequence, and we can see this very clearly when we turn off absolute, all of these things are relative to the first one, right? So normally, what'll happen if let's just play this. So if I put this, if I transpose this, then everything will be transposed, right? If I want to put that back, by the way, to what it was, I don't press 0. That 0 is redundant, I think. You press -1 instead. Okay, but if I go into settings and let me see, where are we? Yeah, notes are absolute. Okay, right. So if I press this and we go out of this, if I change this now, then see, only that note changed. The other ones do not change. Relative, they're not relative anymore. Right? Let me just put a -1. Oh, no, sorry. What's happened there? I was C# before, I think it was. Yeah, okay. Right. So let's go back to settings. So delta step, keep time, we've talked about that already. Let's look at the start. So manual, note on. So you can set it so that a note, when this receives a note, you just connect a keyboard or whatever to it, and you press a note, then it will turn on. You also have an option here, note on restart. The first note you press will start the sequence. If you press another note, that will restart the sequence. It'll make it go back to step 1. Now remember, all this is just for this sequencer 1, right? Here, if I set this DAW transport, then using pause and play button here, that's how I could restart it. We also have MIDI clock options and audio in trigger. So you can even use audio signal to start the sequencer. But if you want to do that, of course, see, I've got this loaded as a MIDI thing here. But if you want to use that, you're going to have to set it up as in an audio effect slot. Woodpeckr, right? You're going to go in there and set that up in that. It's not something I've tried, but that could be very useful for some people. So generally, I've been keeping it on manual, actually. Stop, go to step 1. So here, if I turn this on, let's go out of this. If you remember earlier, I said, and I showed you when we toggle this off, that it would stay at whatever step it was on. But now we've changed that. Now every time I stop this, it will go back to the start when I press on again. Right? So, there's a lot of things thought about here. Yeah. Let me change this preset slightly. So here, I've got a variation on this where I added a second sequence, right? So now we got 2 sequences. Let's just go back to settings for a sec. So resync. So we could make this reset every bar. And remember, again, this is for a certain sequencer. Sequence 1, resync every bar. Sequence 2, no resync on. Let's put that to 1. Interesting, that's going over there. There's definitely going to be a reason for that. So settings, what else have we got? Okay, let's go back to the simple example here that we started with. Simple whole tone starting point. So we've got feel here. And so this will just lengthen every pair of notes. It's just like swing, but you have a reverse option. So if I set this, we can see this very clearly if I set this to just 2 notes, right? Okay, these 2 notes here, C and E. Hang on. This I'm on the second sequencer here. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get tripped up with that. Let's switch back to the first one. Okay, there we go. So if you see here with this all the way to the left, it's staying on C4 for a much longer time relative to what it stays on E4. If I bring it over here, it's the opposite. It lingers on E4, it only just briefly touches C4. So we got the whole range of possibilities there. Okay, let me tap to get this back to what it was. I'll go back to the 2 sequencers running example. I'm just gonna brighten this sound a little bit. So back here, random step. Now remember, we're just dealing with sequence 1 here. So I can make it jump to random steps, and you can see that here. So if I put it at 100, it'll jump to a random step every time. So it won't follow the order at all. Here, it's going to mostly be the order with the odd little random blip. These settings are just for setting the threshold for the audio coming in. If you're using that start with audio in trigger, right? Now you can turn on or off whether you want to receive note on messages, and you've got some settings as well for MIDI channels, including for MIDI 2.0. And remember, that's just for this sequencer, right? So you could set them up to go to different channels. If you set this to global, it will choose whatever channel is set over in advanced settings. So if we go over to advanced, we have MIDI out channel. That's the channel that will be used if you select global in the separate settings for each sequencer. So here it's just going to go to 1. You can set what channels you'll receive MIDI in on and stuff. You can choose let's just switch this preset a second, hang on. So by the way, I'm glad that this is, it's not a pop-up, it is, and I'll just turn this down a little bit. So yeah, it's a floating window, right? So, you can still work with things on the screen to some extent with that there. So you can choose whether you're sending MIDI to the operating system, on the operating system level, or just to the DAW or both. Same, you can choose whether you're going to receive MIDI from the DAW or not. So a lot of these settings are pretty, very nitty-gritty sort of stuff. You can check a lot of it in the manual, let's say. Definitely stuff with MIDI clock. That's not something I ever use, but it has the ability to send and receive MIDI clock, right? Start and stop messages and clock. This is an important one to pay attention to, common variation switching. This is very weirdly named. I feel like there are other things like BRSR, that means browser. Just write browser, please. So here, the way some things are named, it might be hard for the average user to figure out what it is, but it's all there in the manual, But common variation switching, that just means that if I turn this on, if I change here, variation 2, all of these will change to their variation 2 pattern. All 4 of the sequencers, right? Now all 4 are changing to variation 3. Now all 4 are changing to variation 4. It's really good that it has that, and it's really good that it has the option not to have that. Because if I turn that off, and now I go back out, and now if we see I'm on sequencer 1, so if I tap this now, just sequence 1 is going to its variation 2. If I go here, now I'm controlling sequence 2, and I can make it play its variation 3. But the other ones won't change, right? So that's great. And then down here, user scale, right? So for example, for that little thing I did here, where I showed you all the main controls on the main page, this little sequence, I went in and set up a user scale, right, here in advanced, and I just went in, because whole tone, so we got a whole note between each one. So just set it up like this. And notice, by the way, you've got the octave in here. I don't know why that's useful. Maybe it is. I don't know. So anyway, just tap this one just in case. I would have thought, if you're just defining a custom scale, I thought that this would be enough. We don't need that 13th one. But maybe it's probably there for a reason. I'm sure if it's there for a reason. So yeah, so the user scale here, remember that will only define what will happen when we use so let me press run to get out of this view. Now we're on the main view again, right? So random note probability, right? If I set these random, they're going to be contained inside that scale. If I didn't have that set, where is that again? Right. Oh no, hang on, user scale, where is that? That's here, yeah. So limit scale, user, if I turn that free, then now we'll just start getting notes from any scale. And so, you could have some things running free, some things, doing scales. Remember, all of this is per sequencer, right? So, crazy. So, yeah, I mentioned, let's see, here's an example where I noticed a difference between keeping time on or off for that delta thing. So here if you see here, this step time delta, I've reduced the time of those, and this is with keep step time on, and that's with it off. So you can see with it running off and with all of these short, the sequence is cycling around much faster. So it does make a difference, this button, but I just found the odd thing where it didn't. Don't know. Quirky, what was that? Right, yeah, quirky, but not that great. So here, random notes, change scale in settings. So yeah, so here I've set just 4 steps, and I put the random note probability up completely, and here, I set scale to minor pentatonic, and now that's major pentatonic. So you can make it kind of generative, but you're still going to have to do a lot of work. And if you start, hang on, let me just turn this down a little bit. If you start, because if you're going to input, and you have to, for your own, if you want to make an intentional sequence, you're going to have to input it either using these intervals or these notes. So, you're going to need some awareness of what notes are in that scale and so on, So that's why I'm saying there's a lot of sequencers where you just take it and let's just press start there for a second, turn it off. There are a lot of sequencers around where, you just select a scale and tap a few things or drag a few sliders around and all the notes will be quantized. So you're sort of, you're actively involved with it, but you don't really have to think about what notes are actually in that scale and all that kind of thing. And this is not like that. So if it's one thing I suggested, I think it might be good if there was an option where if where you'd have something in settings where you could choose to quantize not just random stuff, but also the options here. For people who don't have much music theory, it would make it easier for them. But it's also important. It's very good that it does allow you to go outside the scale. So it should definitely still keep that option if anything does change, because you really might want to have some notes outside your scale, right? I think something maybe I didn't talk enough about this earlier, skip and mute. So skip, well, actually, this is a really bad example because it's all random. So let me change it. Okay, let's go back to this. So skip and mute. If I press skip here, now I can tap on these. And that might not be very obvious, right? So now these red notes, these are just being skipped completely, right? But if we use mute, that's more like a rest. So we'll get spaces in there, right? So let's just jump to one of the factory presets for a second. Okay, nice. So yeah, my thoughts on this. I think it's really powerful. It's got so many cool features. There's some stuff that is very common, per step probability and all that kind of thing. One thing actually that's missing, I don't see any way to shift a whole sequence entirely right or left. I always think that's important. So I'd like to see that. But there's some really cool stuff here. Like I love the ability to set a range for every single step for the note pitch randomization. That's something that I haven't seen much. One thing I don't really like is the note entry using these drop downs. I just don't find that working with something in that way. It doesn't feel to me like a very musical experience. It's a very intellectual experience. Some people will love it. For some people, if they don't have much theory and stuff, it's going to definitely be challenging for them. But even for people who do understand theory well, that might not be their favorite way of interacting with an app. Overall, it feels like this could have some more concessions to touchscreen. Like I'm really surprised that you can't just swipe here. I'd like to swipe up to increase the pitch and swipe down. And once it reaches the note that I want or whatever, then I just release my finger and that's chosen. I'd still prefer a grid, but that way would be good for me. I mean, I still like having the drop down thing where you can jump to a note specifically, but I definitely find it fatiguing to look at these. But definitely this swiping is gonna be added. Let's see. I think, as I say, I can't adjust the velocity very much at the moment with these sliders. That's something that can easily be changed. The reason that was, the reason it was changed is because somebody complained about how it was hard to make small adjustments to velocity, and I noticed that as well in the first version of the app. If you just tried to reduce the velocity a little bit, it would often drop really hard, but the current way it's set up definitely needs a bit of a tweak. I'm 100% sure that will be tweaked, so I don't see that as problematic. Ratcheting options and, being able to adjust note length here on the fly, that is brilliant. One thing though that I find is missing, and I mentioned this to Wim and he said he will add it, is a gate length setting. That's different from any of this step delta stuff or any other thing. I want to maybe set everything 8th notes, but then I can reduce how much of that 8th note we will actually hear audio on. And I would like the ability to do that per step, as well as doing all the steps at the same time. And that's actually a couple of things actually that I forgot to mention. Yeah, so let me bring those in now. So you've got a button here, all steps. So if you want to adjust all the steps at the same time, you can do that, right? And I think that'll work as well. I haven't tried, let's see. I think that'll work for this too, let's see. Oh, no, it doesn't actually. Okay, that might be useful if it did. Yeah, okay, so there's really cool feature here that I totally forgot to go over. So let me see, let's just change the preset here. I'm gonna change back to Mersenne. So let's try this, okay. All right, so I've turned start off here. Now I can just press here, and I love when apps have this ability. Oh, listen, that's so brilliant. But what is strange is that is not currently, at least, exposed as an AUV3 MIDI parameter. So, I would like to be able to use, I don't know, a button on a MIDI controller or something for that. And I'd also really like to use notes. Every time I press a note on my keyboard, it advances a step. Doesn't have that, but I mentioned that to Wim already, and that definitely the ability to use note entry, that will be entered. I didn't get any feedback yet about whether the AUV3 parameter can be exposed. A lot of the parameters are exposed, but there's a few things that aren't. I'm assuming it's just oversight, and I'd imagine that that will be added. But I think a few of these buttons maybe aren't exposed. And another really important thing too, yeah, and this is something actually that makes it easier to do your note entry, your pitches and things here. Press record. Now this will start from wherever. Hang on a sec. Let me just tap start very quickly 2 times. Bring it back. So here I can look, just play in the notes that I want, right? So that will significantly speed up note entry. That said, I do think it would be good if it had sliders and so on, and I would love a grid, but I doubt that anything like a grid will be added. But yeah, mad powerful, mad powerful. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks a lot to Wim for sponsoring this video. Thanks to everybody supporting me in other ways, Patreon and so on, or using affiliate links and everything. I really appreciate it. It's helping make this channel slowly become a bit more sustainable after so many years of putting in so much work for so little return. So I'm really happy about that. Take it easy and see you in the next one. Cheers.